manholes? Did you have to, really go back and forth with the contractors and trying to get it right?
The issue that we had was space. Um, we had a very narrow corridor that all the utilities had to get into. Power had to get there, water had to get there, gas had to get there. Um, we all had to try to figure out how we were going to fit into this limited space. And then within this limited space, we had to put this big 20 by 20 manhole.
Okay. Yeah, so how did you manage that?
um, very carefully, I can tell you that. Uh, no, basically, we worked with all the other utilities and the contractors for those utilities, and we had meetings almost daily once the construction started. We would be out there, observing, asking questions. We're going to be working, this 100 foot, we were working 100-foot section at a time because it was so crowded. So while we're working this 100 feet, what are our issues? We were there talking out, what anticipated issues do you see?
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Um, we were we were constantly out there and constantly on site working with hand in hand with all the contractors.
Okay. And were there any process bottlenecks while you were working on this?
Two come to mind, but it was we wouldn't have been able to anticipate what they were.
That's fine.
And one of them was an existing manhole.
Okay.
Um, when they had to cut away some concrete that was surrounding the manhole, and we were having issues with getting the concrete cut. Um,
Okay.
but once they put the saw in the ground and started cutting, there was no way for us to know there was going to be issues. There was one of those unforeseen issues,
Yeah,
until it happened.
mid Yeah, yeah. So how did you then deal with that?
So again, we worked with them. We met the contractor out there. He's like, "Hey, we're having issues." And again, in this case, it was unidentified conduits. You know, Things got built. It didn't, it got put in, but it wasn't documented. So we were having to, you know, do the research as they were exposing what was going on. So we were, again, working with the contractor, doing the traces, trying to figure out, where everything went to and from, so they could safely continue to work. So again, we were working with the contractor and trying to discover where those electrical feeds were coming and going to.
Okay. And what you said there were two process bottlenecks. What about the other one?
The other one was one of the manholes. Um, you have to over dig, you know, the hole to put the manhole in, and we were having issues with space and in this case water. The water table got us. They started digging and the water table. It was raining and the water started coming in, so we were constantly having to pump. We had to bring in a pump and start pumping the water and directing it away so they can continue to dig to put the manhole in the ground.
Okay. Okay. And so you worked with the contractor for that.
Yes.
All right. Uh, were you? I'm so sorry. Okay, so the next one is the Four Seasons Resort. We had to basically install electric and fiber optic infrastructures. So was this a project revamp project where there were issues with the existing infrastructure and you had to redo it?
No, ma'am. This was a brand new hotel that was being built in a green field. So it was brand new native ground that they were breaking. So they were building on for this project. Um, we did have to connect to. We had to run a new feeder from the existing closest point of feed, which happened to be there was a retention pond separating a golf course and
Mm-hmm.
where this hotel was being built. So we actually had to drill. We had to do a directional drill underneath the retention pond to install the cables from the golf course into the resort.
That sounds complicated.
Not for me. I just had to design it. It was probably complicated for the people who had to do it, but for me, I just had to speak with the. So we have a water department and survey department for Walt Disney World. I
Mm-hmm.
had to meet with those departments and get the depths for the retention ponds, that particular retention pond, and then get the history. Do they dredge this retention pond, and if they do, how far do they dig down below, when they're dredging. So I had to work with the survey department to find out the history on how it's been maintained,
Oh,
what's the depth, and then we had to figure out how far below those depths did we need to install our cable, how far below did we have to drill those
so
cables in.
all right. So while you were collaborating with these departments, were there any issues in or communication issues or collaboration issues where maybe information wasn't being passed correctly or anything of that sort?
No, ma'am. It actually went really well. We met with them. They were able to provide us documentation. So we had, the documentation showing the depths that we needed. And then once we had that information, our standards had, how far below that we could safely install our future cables, and that's what we went off. We went off the standards, and we were able to come up with a depth that
All
they could be
right.
safely installed.
Did you have to work very closely with the uh, contractors for this because you said that it wasn't complicated for you, but it seems a little complicated implementation wise. So, did you play a more hands-on role in implementation as a result?
Um, no. There were a few issues that came up, once construction started, and it wasn't even with the directional drill. It was with the resort itself. It just happened to be a rainy season, and one of the areas that they were going to be digging in was actually too wet, and there was timing that needed to be done because they needed to have their conduits installed by a particular time, and we were trying to work with the land developer for the hotel and trying to coordinate our guys getting, our duck bank through the area before the resort contractors. um, they were building a retention wall, so we had to get our duck bank in by before the retention wall was built because they were covering it. It was a driveway, so think of an elevated drive. So they were going to be putting additional dirt on top of our duck bank. So we needed to be in before they put in the additional dirt and put up the retention wall so we could get through. So that was coordination that we had to do with the developer.
All right. Okay. Uh, and so you were able to smooth out the issue.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And then the next one is I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong, the Intertie project.
You got it right.
Oh, yay. So you were providing 3.3 miles of interconnection and backup feeder tie points between three substations. So
Correct.
what problems were you trying to solve with this project?
So the Intertie project, basically what that so when I was hired in 2002, there was a fire at one of the substations.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of the fire, one of the theme parks actually had to close. And it was the first time the theme park closed in the history of the park at the time of the fire at 2002.
Okay.
So, so as a result, there was no way to get a backup. They didn't have a backup source of power to keep the theme park running. So the lesson learned was we need to bring in these intertie feeders from one. They need to bring in a feeder to tie one substation to another. So in the event that there is a power failure or another catastrophic fire, there is a way to get an alternate source of power to continue to feed the theme park or the resort or the restaurant, whatever's connected to that substation.
Yeah. So how did you ensure that?
So on this particular project, I was responsible for designing the feeder ties for this.
Okay.
I was tying, one substation to another with one feed, and then I was tying three different substations. I think they had seven. I, I don't remember how many substations they had because they were building two more when I left.
Okay. So I have a question about this. So when you were assigned a project, like, told me about the park had to close, the issue, the challenge. Were you the one who was identifying the solution as well, or were you just doing the design work? So you know how they gave you the designs and they said, okay, this is the issue, and then you identify, okay, this is how we can solve it, and then you design that solution.
In this case, no, I wasn't. The issue had already happened before I was hired, so that the solution, um, management came up with the solution, and there
Oh,
were and I was just given this one particular piece of that of the entire project. So this was my responsibility for all the other pieces that went into that failure, trying
so
to
you
fix
were
that
just
failure.
responsible for the design.
Yes, ma'am. I was assigned that portion of the design.
Okay, that portion of the design. All right.
Correct.
So, because you were working on just one portion, did you have to collaborate with other designers for this? Because, everything's
Um,
interconnected, right?
right. They are interconnected.
You know how you're like,
mm,
okay, I'm going to do this, but the other person is handling this portion of the design. Let me talk to them and see if this, because you could be building one portion and they're doing the other, and then when you're putting the final thing together, there's the two designs aren't compatible, or there's compatibility issues or anything of that sort.
correct. I know I'm trying to think back if there was. I don't remember any coordination issues. Um, we had unusual issues. Again, it was kind of like the directional drill. One portion that we were going through was labeled as a fire lane.
Okay.
So, and it was a dirt fire lane. So again, we had to do research on the fire lane, because it was in a wooded area, and they like take out any vegetation that might grow over the fire lane, and they also till it. Just think of like a farm. You know how you've got the blades on the back of a till? They will
Yeah.
turn up the earth. So we had to speak with the agricultural department and get with them to see how they handle that particular fire lane and to see how far down they would till. And again, we had to make sure that our cables were buried at a safe depth below where they were going to be digging up the earth so they wouldn't hit or expose the conductors that we were putting through there.
All right. And then was that all, or were there any other challenges that you faced?
Um Yeah, there was one other thing on this particular project.
Yeah.
So there's a monorail at Walt Disney World. So you can ride the monorail to get you from resort to the theme parks and just to each individual theme parks. So there was a piece that was going to be digging alongside the monorail. And the standard is you need to be 20 feet away from the monorail when you're digging. And if you're going to be digging closer than 20 feet to the monorail, then you have to have a spotter to make sure that you're not going to hit the beam of the monorail, or if it's if you're digging with a crane or you're working with a crane, that the crane doesn't accidentally swing and hit the monorail track itself. So we received a phone call saying that one of they were digging um, by the monorail, and they actually hit the monorail beam with while they were digging. So we had to go out there and we had to investigate, where was the spotter, how did this happen, you know, that sort of thing. So we had to investigate what happened, why did they hit the monorail beam? Why did they get so close, and what caused them to hit the monorail beam?
Okay. All right. Uh, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then we have the Buena Vista Drive road widening project. You said that this was one of the biggest projects that you did. Can you walk me through your responsibilities for this
Yeah.
in this project?
Okay. So on the road widening project, so what happened is Buena Vista Drive is the road that connects the entertainment district to the resorts and also to the theme parks. And this was a 6 lane, it was a 6 lane, 2, 3 lane divided highway is what it was. And then they were expanding this to 12 lanes. So it was going to be 4 lanes of traffic each way plus turn lanes and a bus lane. And all of the utilities had to move because they were going to be in the way of the road widening project. So we had to move our electrical duct bank system. We had to move our gas. We had to move the water. We had to
Wow.
move all the utilities out of the way. So as part of moving the utilities, we had to install um, we had to install a lot of manholes, the duct banks connecting the manholes. We had to figure out um, so the cable that we were running, the cable reels. We had to figure out how many feet of cable and how many reels of cable did we need to complete this project. And then I had to, you know, once I figured out how many reels of cable that we needed, then I had to figure out, okay, which portion of each feeder was going to be, which reel was it going to come from, and I had to assign a footage for each reel in each segment.
All
So
right.
I had to figure all that out.
Okay, okay. And so while you were figuring out all of these things, were you collaborating with somebody else?
I was working with my engineer, who was my manager at
Okay.
the time. Um, so, he basically said, okay, um, so these cable reels are big and they're heavy. So there is a max size that our contractors, you have to have a special piece of equipment to handle these cable reels. And there was a max size that our contractors could handle. So we knew one reel of cable, the max size that it could have was 750 feet. So I had to figure out how many reels of 750 feet of cable did I need. And then out of that 750 feet, how each piece was dispersed. How was I going to use? Was one entire reel going to go just for one run? or were portions of it going to be allocated for another run?
All right.
And then
Okay.
I came up
And
with
then
a
was there-
schedule, and then he looked at it.
So how did you handle the project scheduling?
Um, so the scheduling itself, um, my engineer, my boss, we when the contractor wins the bid, we sit
Mm-hmm.
down with them and we go through steps. Okay, you know, how long is it going to take you to build the duct bank? How long is it going to take you to install, you know, however many manholes we had? How long is it going to take you to pull, the cable from, you know, through this manhole to the next manhole, to point A to point B kind of thing. So we would
Yeah.
work the schedule with the contractor once they want it.
Okay. So I'm wondering, was there ever a time, maybe with this project or anything else that you remember, any other project that uh, the contractors weren't experienced enough to handle the complications, or you know, there were contractor inefficiencies, or they were causing delays, and then you had to basically readjust things or work more heavily with them.
There isn't anything sticking out in my mind, no, ma'am.
All right.
Um,
And then the last one is the Disney Springs at Walt Disney World Resort. You were responsible for 10 electrical design build packages to accommodate expansion from 75 to more than 150 shopping, dining, and entertainment venues. That seems huge. Um, so what design challenges were you faced with in accommodating the expansion?
in this case, like with a lot of the other ones, it's space. Um, you've got a limited space that you can run your utilities. Um, the way the shops were built, the space that they had to build, we had to look to see where their electrical service entrances were going to be, so we could try to put our transformers as close to their their hookup locations to get the power from our transformer into their building. We had to work closely with them on locations of the transformers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we also had issues with, on this particular one, um, we had to place manholes again on property while it was being built. So again, we had to try to find, space to put these these large manholes that were going to be convenient for the contractor to install, but also be fairly accessible, if something were to go wrong. So we had to find locations for manholes, mostly in parking lots, so they would be easily accessible, if something were to happen.
And so, because so was there any regulatory compliance requirements or challenges that you faced for these new venues?
Trying to think back on construction. Um, mm, on this particular one, one of one of the something that I hadn't done before. It was new for me. So we actually had to do something called a jack and bore. So that's
Hmm.
where, and we had to do it underneath the road, underneath the existing road. We had to cross the road. So a jack and bore is when you dig a big hole, a big receiving pit on either side of the hole, and you literally bring in a piece of equipment that literally hammers in a pipe, a steel pipe that goes underneath the road. Um, so we did a lot of coordination on that one. Where to cross the road was one. Where was a safe place to cross the road? Where were we going to have the less the the least amount of utilities that we were going to have to cross to try to get this pipe underneath the road. Um, and then with that one, another issue that we had was the size of pipe that we needed. Um,
To comply.
because this was the first jack and bore that we had done. Um, we had to come up with there's this cable pulling system. So it's on wheels and it has holes in it. And you tell the manufacturer, how many conduits that you have that need to go through this pipe, what size. And then they work with you on the spacing, how you can lay out those pipes um, on this spacer. And then it's on wheels. And then as they're when they get the pipe in there, you literally put this spacer in there, and you put your conduits in there, and then it actually rolls through the pipe. It helps you roll through the pipe, and it keeps your conduits that you're installing straight, and they don't twist, so they don't twist and turn because they have a tendency to want
All
to rotate while you're pulling them through. So this spacer helps keeps them straight
Okay.
as it
Okay.
goes through the pipe. So that was one thing that we were working with. We were working with the manufacturer on building the spacer to go through the pipe.
And were there any problems with while you were working with the manufacturer?
No, I don't recall any.
All right. So one bullet, so that's it for the project. But one bullet that you wrote was that you communicated with all levels of management and work with all disciplines to build, test, and install and commission um, the this was part of the supporting research and field testing efforts. Can you tell me a little more about that? So it seems like you're talking, communicating, and with multi-tiered stakeholders. So were there any challenges in that communication and collaboration?
Um, no. Usually, the field